Strange times in late night public transportation. Last week I had the strangest public transportation encounter of my life. I work at a bar, thus get off work late. Sure, I could take an Uber or cab, but those add up pretty fast, so I try to take the subway if it's before midnight. Chicago public transportation is pretty great, reliable, convenient, relatively safe, but boy, things can get real weird after 11 p.m. This is mainly due to trains running less frequently, and less fortunate individuals, often drunk, congregating for warmth. I try to time it so I don't have to wait in a tunnel with limited exits with said people. On this night, however, the train was delayed 15 minutes. I mosey over and sit on a bench by a couple of normal-looking business dudes in suits. 10 or so minutes later, this 50-something dude, clearly homeless, shuffles down the platform. When I say shuffle, I mean like no lifting off of the feet, moving them ridiculously quickly, but not gaining much distance. He does all this while whispering, "Fire, fire, burn, burn, burn," on repeat, and shoving handfuls of a family-sized bag of Doritos into his mouth and around his face, because he keeps missing. That alone was strange, but then he comes to an abrupt stop in front of our bench and directly faces me. I could reach out and touch him, not that I would. He stands there completely still, staring at the wall above my head with one of those large creepy grins on his face for about 3 minutes. I'd try my best to seem indifferent, headphones in and swiping things on my phone. The dudes next to me have stopped talking at this point and look at me, and I look at them with my help me eyes. One of the guy then says, "Hey man, you okay?" The homeless dude then quickly breaks his stillness in an almost robotic fashion, whips his head, and looks at the guy, still grinning. He then looks at me, grabs a handful of Doritos, bops me on the head, and slowly crunches and smears the Doritos into my hair. After he robotically turns and does his shuffle thing in the direction he came from, both the business dudes and I sat there in utter shock of what just happened. We then laughed awkwardly, made small talk about it. I brushed the Doritos off of my head. The train came 30 seconds later, thank goodness. Still super unsettling nonetheless. So, Dorito pyro homeless dude, let's not meet. Public transportation. The scariest thing about public transportation is waiting at a bus stop alone. A fear I have to get past every day to get to school. To go by unnoticed, I never look anyone in the eyes, and I constantly wear my earphones. To get to my school, which is like an hour and some change away by bus. I have to take 2 buses, and because I'm new to town and just got a job, I'm meeting a lot of people and being overwhelmed with new faces. I sometimes forget whether or not I've met someone before. So, to carry on with my story, I'm waiting at my bus stop in the morning on my way to school, and on the other side of the street, a car passes, and the guy driving is practically hanging out of his window, waving and smiling at me. I naively thought maybe it was someone at work I had met because I didn't really have time to study his face, so I smiled back. The next thing I know, half a mile down the road at the first intersection, since seeing me, he makes a U-turn and comes speeding down the road towards me and stops in the middle of the road and asks me if I needed a ride. It was no one I had met before, and that mildly freaked me out, but I thought maybe he was just being nice. He asked me where I was going, and I told him I was on my way to school, and then he offered to drive me there again, at which I replied that I was clearly going in the opposite direction since he had been driving the other way, and I did not want to be an inconvenience. At this point, because he had stopped in the middle of the road at my bus stop, there were cars behind him honking wildly, and I told him he should just go. He insisted I get in a couple times, and then he drives away to my relief. My bus then shows a couple minutes later, and I get off, like 10 stops later, and catch the next bus to get to school. The next thing I know, while waiting for my bus, the same guy shows, minus the car, and sits down right next to me, telling me he can give me a ride, that he just parked his car at the Starbucks behind us so he could come talk to me. I then see my bus, and I tell him I have to go, because I see my bus, and he grabs my wrist and asks me to catch the next one. As soon as the doors open, I quickly pulled away and hopped onto the bus, and I nearly gave the bus driver a hug for showing up just at the right time. I told him the whole story, and we joked about it nearly every morning now. I'm just happy he didn't try pursuing me any further, like following me to the school, or trying again the next morning, seeing as how I catch the same bus at the same time every morning. I know it's not as scary as most of the posts in this thread, but it has to be one of the freakiest things that has happened to me since moving to the city. Creeps love public transportation. I just spent the last few hours at work reading all your stories, and I thought I had a good story to share. This must have been only a year or so ago, before I got my license. I would have been around 19 to 20 years old. I look quite young, especially when I don't have makeup on. I could easily be taken for a 15-year-old girl. I'd spend the nights at my boyfriend's house and was heading back to my end of town the next morning. He lived on the other side of the city from me, and it took about 40 minutes via train to get back to my end. I got on the train at the last stop at the south end and sat there with my headphones in when a man in his late 30s got on the train and sat across from me. He began talking to me, just small talk, and I was polite and talked with him for a bit. He wasn't threatening in any way, shape, or form. He just seemed to be a little odd. He had a camcorder with him and said that he liked recording things like scenery, and pointed out the window of the train, rambling on about how he's in school for film. After a few stops, an announcement came on to the train that was stated there was a construction going on, so we would have to take shuttles part of the way. Hoping that this was a good way to lose the guy, I got up and walked towards where the shuttle was waiting, and tried to mix into the crowd waiting, and got on to the busy shuttle. I found a seat and sat down next to someone else. The weird guy got on and sat on a different seat, somewhat diagonally from me, still with his camcorder. For some reason, I noticed an older lady in her 50s sitting with her husband. I remember thinking she seemed like a nice lady. 10 minutes go by, and we were able to switch back to a train, so I get off and got onto another train. I noticed the same older lady and her husband were sitting nearby as well, and the weird guy manages to find me again and continued to talk to me. No matter how much I tried to ignore him, he just kept talking to me the whole time. Again, nothing overtly creepy, just about if I'm in school or if I work, that kind of stuff. Once we got closer to my stop, the older lady I had noticed on the bus came up to me, leaned very close to my ear and said, "I just want to tell you how beautiful you are," and grabbed my hand. I thought, man, this train is full of weird fucking people. But I quickly noticed she slipped something into my palm. I looked down at it, and it was a tea bag, and she had written something like, "That man has been recording you," on it. I felt sick to my stomach, and went into fight, flight, or freeze mode, and I froze. I sat there shocked for a couple more stops, completely ignoring this guy now, until my stop came up. I got off and quickly started walking into the station. I noticed the man was right behind me now, quickly coming towards me. I frantically looked around and noticed the lady that warned me and her husband were coming up beside me. The lady took my arms in hers, and they escorted me to my bus stop and offered to wait with me. The guy ended up walking by us and disappeared into the shops nearby. I got onto my bus, and once I got on my bus, I ran home and broke down when I saw my mom and told her everything, and decided to call the police. They were really not much help. They seemed to think that since no actual harm had come to me, that it wasn't a big deal. They said that they would take a description and review security footage. I never heard anything from them after, but I still have that tea bag. Alone in a foreign train station. When I was 15 years old, my mom and I took a trip to Germany and Switzerland to visit relatives. We are Canadian, and we also stopped in Italy for 2 days. We kept our Italy plans loose. We decided at the station to hop on a train to Milan. When we arrived, we felt a little lost in the train station and were dragging large, heavy luggage. So, my mom left me with the bags in a seating area off to the side, while she went to find someone to help us with accommodations for the night. There wasn't anyone else sitting in the strip of seats, so it was strange when a man decided to sit two spots away from me, probably only a minute or two after my mom had left. He smelled like the floor of filthy bathrooms that's littered with cigarette butts. I felt slightly uncomfortable, but didn't look at him and continued to wait. But soon I could feel his eyes on me. I gave him a warning glance like, "Hey, I know you're staring, so stop." A few times, he did not stop staring. Then I realized he was staring at my crotch. I felt really uncomfortable by now, but I had these huge, heavy bags and didn't want to move in case my mom couldn't find me. But then he started touching himself, rubbing over his jeans. A man passed by. The creep stopped rubbing himself. I was frozen. Then he continued when the other man was gone. Till this point in my life, I've never experienced such objectification and violation. My horror and unpreparedness allowed him to continue. Finally, I hopped up and pushed all the luggage as fast as possible around the corner, feeling his eyes until I was out of sight. But he was still close by. Now what, then? I spotted my mom coming down the escalator and burst out crying. My mom and I decided to leave Milan in favor of Como. That night on a connecting train platform, I swear I saw him again, following what looked like a school group. Not sure it was really him, but I know that it was what I perceived. Stinky train station creep, let's not meet again. Incredibly bizarre and creepy encounter at train station. While this was now almost 16 years ago, I still remember every single detail about this encounter quite vividly. It was so random and so distinctly bizarre that I will never forget just what happened. I'm sorry it's so long. Background: I was 20 years old at the time, and after visiting friends in college for the weekend, found myself traveling home alone and taking a late train from Boston out to the suburbs where my car is parked. I'm running late and very concerned that I'm going to miss the last subway out of Boston, but gratefully the train I needed pulled up quickly. I remember being annoyed at myself for creating stress with such an unnecessarily close call, as I was definitely either on the very last or next to last train out to Boston. And while I have friends I could stay with if I missed the last train, I have work in the morning and my phone is completely dead. The ride is long and slow, and there is hardly a soul on the train after we leave the immediate Boston area, which isn't odd, seeing how it is Sunday and after midnight. Halfway through the 45-minute ride, I doze off and jerk awake at hearing the blaring Braintree announcements, which is my stop. In my foggy state, I grab my bag and jump off the train. The moment I realize I'm at the wrong stop, the doors close. Turned out, they were just announcing the train destination, not train stop. As you can imagine, I'm feeling pretty lousy about this, watching the train plod off in the direction I need to be going. I'm the only person to get off the train, and the station is unfamiliar and utterly deserted. Quickly I realize I'm in Quincy, 3 long stops away from my destination, and I feel screwed. I really need to be on another train. I looked around and realized I'm close to the end of a desolate and strikingly dark outdoor train platform. While the chances of there being another train so late is extremely slim, it's my only hope, and I begin to feel panicked, stupid, and vulnerable. After a minute or two of standing there dumbfounded and triple-checking my phone, being dead, I suddenly spotted a man, standing alone under a light, a distance down the long and thin platform. A little ways further beyond him appears to be the only entrance/exit, unless there are some stairs going down in the terminal halfway down that I can't see. While the man makes me a little nervous, he's clearly facing the tracks, which gives me hope that one last train is on the way. I decide to just quietly sit on the bench close by and choose to stay unnoticed and in the dark while I wait. The bench is partially enclosed, and when I sit down on it, I'm basically obscured from the shoulders down by deep shadows and can still see in every direction but directly behind me. A quick glance around it, though, confirms I'm definitely down there alone. So on the dark bench I sit and wait and feel comfortably obscured. With my wearing dark clothes and it being so dark on my end of the station, I have the opportunity to rather blatantly watch the man at the end of the platform. The well-lit man is tall, thin, not old, like 30s, slightly shaggy hair and casually preppy. He's strange though, standing abnormally still, looking straight ahead in a weird way. Something is off, but he's minding his business, and probably doesn't even know I'm here. And while I feel rather uneasy, I do find some slight comfort in being certain that no one is down here with me, and can openly watch the only other person from my dark, hidden bench. After watching for a few minutes, the man begins to rock a little, placing weights on one foot and then another. He then takes a few slow steps towards the edge of the platform, and I notice that he's using a white and red walking cane for the visually impaired, and tapping and feeling his way as he walked forward. Suddenly I'm very relieved, as this may explain his unusual posture. Just as I'm feeling more relaxed, the feeling vanishes. He's still walking towards the platform edge, and quickly, I stiffen and sit up straight, looking intently. He makes it to the bright yellow raised metal warning tread that is at the very edge of the platform, only a foot wide, and directly before an 8-foot drop onto the electrified train tracks. He stops there, banging his cane against the edge, toes literally at the furthest point. I stand up, and I walk a few paces closer as he starts to sway again, but more dramatically. My mind begins to race. What's going on? Is this a suicide situation? He is in a lot of danger. I want to take action and try quickly to figure the best way, because this poor man needs help of some kind. I'm just trying to figure out how to approach him, because I really don't want to startle him with him being so close to the edge. In fact, he's the furthest you can go, and his swaying has evolved a kind of dance. Suddenly, after what seems like ages, but is probably just a minute or two, he stops and begins to take slow steps backwards, until finally, he returns to standing still and staring straight ahead, back under that spotlight. With my heart racing and mind sprinting, I return to my dark bench, sit back down quietly, and try to process what's suddenly happening. I want to help this man, but I'm being overwhelmed by alarms in my brain. I keep watching him, being as silent as possible. He stands calmly for a few minutes under the light facing the tracks, and safely, several paces away from the edge, I decide to get help. I mean, he just did something crazy, really unnerving and really dangerous, and I don't know what his intentions are. I'm still sitting on my dark bench, fighting off conflicting feelings and secretly watching him when he suddenly turns his whole body to directly face me. Straight on facing me, exactly the angle to where I'm sitting, and he's smiling. He's far away. Well, so well lit. I can tell he is absolutely smiling and suddenly looking right at me. I'm completely startled and my jaw drops. My mind is now racing like crazy. He knows I'm here. He knows I'm here. He must know I'm here. But if he knows I'm here, why is he facing me? He knows exactly where I'm sitting. What? Is he actually blind? But I'm sitting in the dark and not making a sound. He's smiling. I froze. Solid. What happens next is so sudden that I remain basically frozen like a statue, sitting on the dark bench the entire time, not even making the slightest of sounds. Suddenly, so smiling, he turns and faces the train tracks, and again, using his cane, walks right over to the very edge and begins to side, swaying, except now it's even more dance-like. He then changes positions, putting one foot right on the edge and one foot behind him, and starts his exaggerated lunging motion, nearly jumping off the platform but catching himself before he does. He does this repeatedly. All the while, I'm just watching from a distance, basically in, well, horror and confusion. Suddenly he stops all this and turns. This time he doesn't face me, but faces in my general direction, my end of the tracks. Smiling still from what I can see, he slowly begins to walk down the platform towards me. He is right on the edge, directly on the warning track the whole time. I can hear the clack of the cane going side by side. He is so close to the edge that the cane is going into the darkness. He gets closer and closer, and I can do absolutely nothing but stare. How can he be walking so close to the edge? Why is he coming down here? Closer and closer he gets, and I can now see him better still, the big gaping grin on his face, empty and farcical like a game show host, and his eyes, they're slammed shut. They aren't gently closed, they are aggressively and exaggerated closed, very, very tight. I know, though, that it's possible to peer a little bit while making this face. My mind is exploding, and I remain frozen solid. He is now so close, about 20 feet away. I'm thinking that if I hang on just one more minute, maybe he'll walk right by me. And with him out of the way of the entrance, I can run and go get help. And maybe, just maybe, his facing me smiling was just a coincidence. Maybe this whole time he had no idea I was even here. Maybe he really is blind. But greatly to my dismay, only about 15 feet before he reaches me, he stops. And he turns and faces me, eyes still slammed shut, gaping smile. He's just now standing there on the edge of the platform facing me. His eyes are tightly shut, and he is facing right at me. This can't be possible. I feel like I'm in a surreal nightmare, and then suddenly it gets much worse. He then starts making this weird high-pitched whimpering, moaning, feminine, soft laugh. He reaches for the zipper on his pants and unzips them. While holding his cane, he pulls down his pants and underwear, exposing his penis, and then while still facing me, starts jumping up and down, all the while continuing to do that soft, coy laugh. He then changes positions and starts doing that jumping from foot to foot, lunging motions like he's about to jump into the path of a train, except now his movement compromised by his pulling down pants. He continues this smiling, eyes shut, penis flopping around this way and that, making that simpering laugh, all the while I'm sitting there in some goddamn memorized horror states. Suddenly, I hear the train rattling loud and approaching fast. In frozen horror, I'm both groveling in thanks to God and terrified that at the end of all this is true insanity. I'm about to see someone commit suicide right in front of me or accidentally get hit by the train. Right as the train reached the platform and started slowing down, he returns to simply swaying again and takes a step back. Being the very last train of the night, every car seems to have some people on it. I knew immediately I was safe. The train stops and I sprint like hell down the platform a few car distances down and jump on. I don't know if he gets on the train too or just stands there, but I definitely don't hear anyone yelling or anything, so I assume that he pulled his pants up either way. And so, once on the train, I sink into the seat, My mind thoroughly blown. My mind explodes in every single variation of the feeling that can basically be eloquently slummed into one big giant what the fuck. Gratefully, at the end of all that, I really do feel immediately safe, and I'm not further subjected to worrying about him following me off the train if he even got on, because there's also people getting off at Braintree. It was just simply quite odd and bizarre that I felt like after all these years sharing it, it's so weird. It's easily the closest thing to a nightmare I've ever experienced. It was so weird, crazy, surreal, and happened so quickly that it was almost like I coasted cleanly, not being scared and just settled into a kind of hypnosis and unable to move. I'm not trying to be dramatic about it, I just don't know how else to describe it. Honestly, when I got on that train, I was just sitting there a bit tweaked, wide-eyed, and really honestly laughing in my head at the sheer shock of it all. The immense feeling of relief I felt when I boarded the train quickly changed any feelings of horror to that of shock, disbelief, and gratitude. Man on train decides he doesn't like how I sit, tries to intimidate me. This happened to me about a month ago, but it still boggles me. 2 points of background to make this story make sense. 1, I live in Tokyo and commute via those famously crowded, crazy trains daily. There exists on them this kind of unspoken agreement that everyone works together to make this suck as little as possible. People, for the most part, hold their backpacks in front of them. Men don't manspread, etc. But that's when the trains are full. About 2 stops before mine, the train goes from sardine can to everyone on this train can lay on the seats and have room left over, so usually I can sit down at this point. Number 2, I'm not a Japanese woman, very obviously so, even when I am in my white dress shirt and pencil skirt like all the other office drones. I am often very obviously non-Japanese woman on my train in the morning, but despite my appearance, I'm fluent in Japanese. So, one day I sit down when the train empties out, headphones in, mobile game going, ready to enjoy the 10 minutes of sitting I get on my hour commute. I'm sitting with my legs crossed, but there's maybe 10 people in the whole car, so I'm not in anyone's way. I'm tuned out when all of a sudden, a hand reaches out and grabs my bare knee. I'm in a skirt. I of course jolt straight out of my skin, rip out my headphones and look up at the hand's owner. It's some skinny old Japanese dude, 60s. He points at my legs, then at other people on the train. In slightly broken English, he says, "You must not cross legs." I'm so bewildered by this, I started telling him in Japanese, "The train isn't crowded right now. I'm not in anyone's way." But he doesn't like this answer. He starts to reach for my legs again, presumably to uncross my legs himself. I, liking even less of this, summon up my loudest non-scream, "Don't touch me!" And thankfully this is enough to get him to stop that. As another thing you don't do on trains here is make a fuss. Sadly though, yet another thing you don't do here is get involved. So despite a woman all but screaming, "Don't touch me," it's some foreign woman causing trouble. Best not to get involved, etc. So no one comes over. So while I've made it clear that I will not stand for physical confrontations, this old dude still feels comfortable enough to stand directly in front of me, nearly knee to knee, looming over me while he repeats endlessly, "You must." He did this for at least 5 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't blink or break eye contact. I started plan B's through P of how to get off this train at the next stop. Thankfully, he gave up before the next stop, shaking his head and calling me a rude bitch in Japanese before wandering off. Still, took the same train, but haven't seen him since. Let's not meet, leg police fucker, lest you find out what happens when you loom over a girl at dick punting height.